Nick did it to him. Nick did it to him again. I hope I said it here on Cover 3, but I did have the sense that if it was close, I had more faith in Alabama winning from the Vibes perspective, right? Vibes GPT says if you're going to get one of these quarterbacks, if you're going to get one of these offenses, one of these teams that's going to get caught in a dogfight, like, I think Alabama coming out of what they just did to Auburn, just going to have like a little bit of extra juice versus the team that had been sitting with the number one beside its name all season long. And yeah, like against Missouri, it was a little bit close. Slow start against South Carolina, slow start against Auburn, but just blew the doors off Ole Miss and dominated Tennessee. And while Georgia Tech had a close final margin, you never really had that. You never really had to fight quite like Alabama has had to fight throughout the entire season. I hadn't thought about this. Great championship Saturday for Vibes. What did we see along the way? Because Alabama, Georgia felt like it was truly a heavyweight bout where there were like 3 or 4 different chapters in terms of what was happening. Tom, where do you want to start in terms of like what stands out to you out of the game?
That I don't think offensively either team really played well.
Hold on. Yes, in the second half. The end of the game.
Second half for sure, but
yeah.
I mean, even in the entire game, Alabama finished with 4.8 yards per play. It's not like they were tearing it apart all day. I think what stood out was, to me, the first thing I noticed was, we've talked about it, Georgia for the most part all year long would come out in a base defense and wait to see what you were trying to do to it before it would start tinkering and changing things up and doing the stuff it wanted to do. That was not the case today. Georgia came right out of the gate, like double spying Jalen, trying to keep him in the pocket. And it became clear, which not altogether unpredictable, considering what we've talked about Jalen Milroe being, they wanted to keep Jalen locked up in the pocket, and they wanted to take away the deep ball. And they were going to be like, all right, bro, hit the singles and the doubles. And if you could do it enough, cool. And Jalen hit enough singles and doubles. Like, Jalen improvised a lot better, I think, than I have seen him at any other point. Like the one play, I can't remember, I think it was the Bond, where he was just kind of, he scrambled out of the pocket, he was harried, and he just kind of did the Patrick Mahomes flip.
The little pitch forward. Yeah.
That was huge. I was like, oh my, I didn't realize Jalen had that in the bag just yet. So I feel like while he didn't have a great game overall from a numbers perspective, I do think that was one of the most impressive performances I've seen from him as far as a passer, in that it wasn't always pretty, especially because he got off to such a terrible start. He was like, 0 for his first 4. And then, so he finishes 13 for 19 after that. But to overcome the shaky start, to make the plays more often than not when they needed him, he did get caught in the pocket too much. He was sacked a little bit too often, and he got away with it. But I just feel like that was kind of a very gutsy performance from Milroe against a very good secondary that did, for the most part, a decent job of locking Alabama's receivers up. Because if you look, Bond is the only one who caught more than 2 passes. Like, they had to really spread the ball around to find any kind of success in the air and move it down the field. Georgia was the same story for the most part, although they've kind of been that way all year. So I think the 2 defenses were the best units on the field for most of the night. But I think, as far as players who had the biggest impact, or at least made the biggest moments, it was Jalen Milroe. And then on the other side, like, Bowers and McConkey clearly were not 100%. McConkey was like limping off the field every other play. Bowers just looked kind of slow. But even as big as those injuries were, I felt like when they lost Mims, the game really turned, because it took away a lot of what they could do on offense, because they just no longer really had the guys up front who could block Bama.
We talked a couple weeks ago about live betting against Kent State when they lost their tackle. It was like, what's the chances Kent State, an awful team, has another guy whose body looks like that when he went down, right? Like, Mims is a really important part of that team. He's a freak. We talked about how it was going to be a challenge for him to block the Bama guys. The backup for Georgia, yeah, like Braswell and Turner did a really nice job on him. I thought Nick Saban did a great job of getting Alabama to play, or getting Georgia to play Alabama's game. You know, like that's kind of how the game had to be played for Alabama to win it. Like they had less than 5 yards of play. The offense didn't look good to me, and they won the game. They were the more physical football team. They pushed Georgia around a little bit, and it didn't really lead to many scores. What did lead to scores for the most part was, I mean, a play that I'm like Georgia fans are probably going to make a documentary about, because they seem to think that the refs steal the game from them every time they play Alabama. But legitimately, like
The bond, yeah.
yeah, like whether or not that was a catch, I tend to think it probably was not a catch, because the entirety of the bottom of the ball is laying on the ground and then also moves and bounces around. But like, I mean, who knows? It's 2023. What's a catch? What's not? That was huge. And then getting the turnover deep in Georgia's zone. Like those two things directly led to scores. Bama obviously earned that, right? Well, maybe not the Bond catch. That's a 4th down stop for Georgia and probably going the other way. But like Bama was really physical. They have sort of a more narrow window to win because of how limited they are passing the football. And yet they played within that window and deserved to win, or at least didn't like clearly deserve to lose. That's a hell of a job by Nick Saban.
Yeah, I want to get to that in just a second.
That defense is nuts.
Kirby Smart talking to, hey, y'all see Dennis on the broadcast?
Mm-hmm.
The Godfather,
Big time now
on Big CBS, is the one-on-one with Kirby. You know, and Kirby was doing, I will say that based on the tone of the interview, in case you haven't seen it, it was more explanation than excuse, because a lot of it was talking about how proud he was of the team. But he talked about the throw to Jam Miller. He was like, we've got a freshman linebacker in there because we're a little bit banged up. He makes the wrong play because on the wheel route, I mean, that was ridiculous, right? And when you have 2 defenders on a tight end that's breaking to the inside and your running back is wide open to the flat, like that was a huge moment in the game. Then he talked about, you know, we were down 2 receivers. I mean, basically Kirby went through an injury report in a 90-second interview with Dennis Dodd to be able to explain like how proud he was of his team for fighting. And here's all the reasons why things did not go well for us today. He seems to, you know, believe that if you're going to point fingers at why this 1-score game did not go Georgia's way, seems kind of fine with the idea that a lot of it was because of health. But I did have a thought during the game. It faded as Alabama's offense was not as successful in the second half. In fact, it was, you know, if you were to follow like their like success rate in real time, it's kind of like a steep downward climb throughout a lot of the second half.
Mm-hmm.
But after the holding penalty that set up the 1st and 20, and then it was the Jam Miller touchdown, like the next 10 plays or so, kind of felt like Tommy Rees was in his bag. Kind of thought that, you know, they were doing a good job of keeping Georgia's defense off balance. And maybe some of that is personnel related, where they found a couple things they wanted to exploit. After halftime, it ends up getting adjusted. But man, new offensive coordinator in Tommy Rees, new defensive coordinator. You've got the whole, like, who's calling the plays that Lane Kiffin's calling out early in the year. Nick Saban, like the coaching job that he did with this group, a group that he even said himself, you know, I like the way these, I'm paraphrasing here, but like, I like the way these guys practice. I like the way these guys compete. There's kind of this unsaid acknowledgement. They are not as talented as most Alabama teams, but the fact that the fabric of what they've got is something that made him really happy, had him smiling more than ever before. I felt like those things showed up today in Atlanta in the SEC championship.
He's loving this win, man. Don't you think? Like, God, like I think he knows this team's not that good. I'm not saying like he's out there saying like that they're not good. They're good. They're damn good. The defense is really good. But like this is winning Nick's way. Like he's got to be loving. I bet you he really, really enjoyed this one. Especially because of how well his defense played the stuff that Georgia was trying to do to get their guys open. to Tom's point, like with McConkey and Bowers being limited, like, man, how many times did Bama bust? Like they played the switches well, like they played all the crossers well. They rarely got picked. I mean, we talked about like a freshman linebacker getting picked for the Jam Miller touchdown. How many times did Bama get picked? Right?
And,
like, Bama was like, you have to beat us one-on-one.
Kool-Aid got knocked out of
they
the
lost
game.
Kool-Aid. Yeah,
Right,
and they
exactly.
still didn't screw up.
Yeah.
Darion Arnold had a great game.
Extremely well coached defensive effort by Alabama. Like that was really, really good. Milroe, no turnovers, right?
Nope.
That's pretty huge too.
He did a great job of holding onto the football as he was getting dragged to the ground for 12-yard losses.
Yes. Yeah, that was. And like Georgia's plan was clear. They were playing like a double spy, literally, on Milroe. And it was, okay, if the guy goes to this side, cool, the other guy drops off. But initially, like they're playing like two spy, which is not a normal defense you play.
You have to really trust your secondary if you are going to be playing two spies.
Yeah.
And there were a couple, what they got like 2 pass interference calls on deep throws. Like the deep balls did not necessarily always hit, but the threat of that, especially with everything they were committing to trying to stop Milroe running, led to the one-on-one opportunities. That is a couple Bond catches, controversial or not. That is Jermaine Burton bobbling another one and being able to pull it down in the end zone. It was a fun game.
It was.